The air buzzed with excitement as I stepped onto the sprawling university campus for the first time. Orientation week, that magical time when everything feels possible and terrifying all at once. My name is Alex, and this was supposed to be my fresh start. The campus quad was transformed into a festival of possibilities, colorful tints dotting the green space like mushrooms after rain, each one representing a different club, activity, or resource. Students flowed between them in currents of laughter and chatter, while I stood at the edge, clutching my orientation packet like a life preserver in a sea of unfamiliar faces. I'd spent most of high school keeping to myself, hiding behind books and careful smiles. Coming to Westlake University was my chance to finally be myself, whoever that was. I still wasn't entirely sure. The weight of unexpressed identity had followed me from my small hometown, where being different wasn't exactly celebrated. Here, among thousands of students from across the country, I hoped to find the courage to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding for years. The weather that morning had been perfect: clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of late summer day that makes you believe in new beginnings. But as I wandered between the tents, collecting flyers I'd probably never read and nodding at enthusiastic club representatives, I noticed the sky darkening at the edges. The meteorology club representatives were the first to pack up, pointing knowingly at the gathering clouds while muttering about barometric pressure and precipitation patterns. "They're saying it's going to be a big one," a girl with a climate action button informed me as she hurriedly collected her pamphlets. "The main orientation activities are moving to the big tent. You should head there now if you don't want to get soaked." I thanked her and followed the growing stream of students toward the massive white tent erected at the center of the quad. It was impressive, easily the size of a small circus tent, with the university logo emblazoned on its sides. As I approached, I could hear the amplified voice of an orientation leader trying to maintain order as more and more students crowded inside. "Everyone, please find a spot. We'll continue with the scheduled activities in here until the storm passes. Program directors, please check in at the front table." The first rumble of thunder rolled across the sky as I ducked inside, joining what felt like half the freshman class. The tent was a chaotic blend of excitement and confusion. Orientation leaders in bright blue shirts moved through the crowd, trying to organize people into groups while the sound system crackled with announcements no one could quite hear. Tables had been hastily set up around the perimeter, where various campus organizations were reforming their displays. Let me explain why this moment matters. It was the perfect metaphor for starting college. One minute you think you know what's happening, the next you're swept up in chaos, surrounded by strangers, trying to find your place while the world seems to shift around you. I felt my anxiety rising with each new person who squeezed into the already crowded space. The air grew thick with humidity and the collective heat of too many bodies. Another crack of thunder, closer this time, and the first heavy drops of rain began to pelt the tent roof. The sound quickly intensified from scattered tapping to a roaring drum roll. People pressed further inward, away from the edges where water was beginning to splash through. I found myself pushed toward the center, my carefully maintained personal bubble shrinking by the second. "Looks like we're in for quite a show," someone said beside me, voice raised to be heard over the din of rain and chatter. I turned to find myself looking up. Yes, definitely up, at one of the most striking faces I'd ever seen. Dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he was doing now. Hair that curled slightly where it fell across his forehead. Broad shoulders under a worn denim jacket covered in patches and pins. "Yeah," I managed, mentally congratulating myself on such a witty response. "I'm Jake," he said, extending a hand. "Junior, English Lit major, and veteran of exactly 2 previous orientation weeks, though none quite this dramatic." "Alex," I replied, shaking his hand and trying not to notice how warm it was. "Freshman, undecided major, veteran of absolutely nothing." His laugh was unexpected and genuine, a sound that seemed to carve out a small pocket of calm in the chaos around us. "Undecided is the most honest major there is. I changed mine 3 times before English Lit stuck." Before I could respond, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. At the far edge of the tent, water was beginning to seep under the canvas walls, spreading across the ground in a widening dark stain. The orientation leaders looked at each other with expressions of growing concern. "That's not good," Jake observed, his easy smile fading slightly. This field has always been a bit of a drainage problem. Campus facilities keeps promising to fix it. As if his words had triggered it, the seeping water suddenly became a flow, streaming across the tent floor as the rain intensified outside. People began to move away from the spreading puddle, which only pushed the already dense crowd tighter together. I felt my chest tightening with each new person who pressed against me. "Hey, you okay?" Jake's voice cut through my rising panic. His eyes were focused on mine, concerned. "Not great with crowds," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. Another thunderclap, so close it seemed to shake the ground beneath us, and then the real chaos began. A strong gust of wind caught the tent, making the entire structure shudder. One of the side panels tore free, and rain blew in horizontally, drenching everyone in that section. Screams and shouts mixed with nervous laughter as people scrambled away from the breach. The orientation leaders were now in full crisis mode, shouting instructions that no one could hear over the storm. The water on the ground was ankle-deep in places, flowing like a small river through the tent. Electronic equipment sparked and went dark. In the confusion, I lost sight of Jake and found myself being pushed toward the flooding section by the shifting crowd. Cold water soaked through my sneakers as I tried to find stable footing. The tent shuddered again with another gust, and this time a support pole tilted dangerously. People were really panicking now, pushing toward the exits. I felt myself being carried along, struggling to stay upright in the flow of bodies and water. And then, through the chaos, a hand caught my arm. Jake appeared beside me, his expression determined as he pulled me against the current of the crowd. "This way," he shouted over the noise, guiding me toward what looked like an even more flooded section. I wanted to resist, to tell him he was heading the wrong way, but his grip was firm and somehow reassuring. We reached a relatively clear spot near one of the tent walls, where the ground sloped slightly upward. The water was only a thin sheet here rather than the deeper flow in the center. Jake positioned himself between me and the worst of the crowd. "Better?" he asked, still nearly shouting to be heard. I nodded, though better was relative in what was quickly becoming a disaster zone. Another powerful gust sent a sheet of rain through a new tear in the tent, drenching us both. I gasped at the sudden cold, and that's when Jake did something that would replay in my mind for days afterward. Without hesitation, he unzipped his jacket, pulled me against his chest, and wrapped the sides of the denim around me like a shield. The sudden warmth and the solid presence of him was so unexpected that I froze, my face inches from his. "Sorry," he said, his voice softer now that we were so close. "You looked like you were about to turn into a popsicle." I should have been embarrassed. I should have pulled away and insisted I was fine. Instead, I found myself relaxing into the unexpected shelter he'd created, grateful for both the warmth and the barrier against the chaos around us. "Thanks," I managed, very aware of how his arms formed a protective circle without quite touching me. The jacket wasn't large enough to fully close around both of us, but it created a small private space in the middle of the crowded tent. Time seemed to slow in that moment. The storm still raged, people still shouted, water still flowed across the ground, but all of it felt distant, secondary to the strange intimacy of standing so close to someone I'd just met. I could smell the faint scent of coffee and something like old books clinging to his clothes. I noticed a small scar near his eyebrow, the way his eyelashes were still spiky with rain. "I'm not usually this forward," Jake said with a small smile. "But extreme weather calls for extreme measures. Is this how you welcome all the new freshmen?" I asked, finding my voice and even a bit of humor. "Only the ones who look like drowned cats," he replied, then quickly added, "A compliment, by the way. I'm very fond of cats." A crash from across the tent drew our attention. One of the display tables had collapsed, sending brochures floating away on the indoor flood. The orientation leaders were now actively directing everyone to leave the tent in an orderly fashion, a request that was being largely ignored as people made for the exits. "We should probably get out of here," Jake said, though he didn't move immediately. There was a question in his eyes, a hesitation that made my heart beat faster. Another violent gust decided for us. The entire tent structure groaned, and more water poured in from multiple breaches. Jake finally released me from the shelter of his jacket, but kept hold of my hand. "Stay close," he said, and began guiding me toward the nearest exit, navigating through the flood and the panicked crowd with surprising skill. The rain outside was still coming down in sheets, but at least there was no danger of a tent collapse. Students huddled under whatever shelter they could find: trees, building overhangs, shared umbrellas. Some had given up entirely and were embracing the downpour, laughing as they splashed through puddles. Jake pulled me toward the nearest building, which happened to be the library. We joined the stream of soaked students seeking refuge inside. The security guards had given up on checking IDs and were simply waving everyone through, more concerned with the puddles forming on the marble floor than with proper protocols. The library's grand entrance hall was filled with dripping students, the sound of squeaking shoes, and the peculiar smell of wet clothes in an air-conditioned space. Jake still hadn't let go of my hand, I realized, and made no move to do so as we found a relatively empty corner. "Well," he said, running his free hand through his wet hair, making it stand up in odd spikes. "That's one orientation activity they didn't put in the brochure." I laughed, feeling the tension of the last half hour finally breaking. "Very immersive. I feel thoroughly oriented to campus flooding patterns." "It's important knowledge," he agreed solemnly. "Knowing which buildings to avoid during storms is critical survival information. The library, for instance, excellent high ground. Good solid construction. Plus, books." "You really are an English major," I teased, surprised at my own boldness. His smile widened. "Guilty as charged. And you? Any leanings yet undecided?" The conversation flowed easily after that. We found seats on a staircase, still damp but no longer dripping, and talked as if we'd known each other for years instead of hours. Jake was from Chicago, had a younger sister who was too smart for her own good, and had chosen Westlake because of its renowned creative writing program. He worked part-time at a coffee shop just off campus and lived in an apartment with 2 roommates and a cat named Gatsby. I told him about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, about my passion for both science and art that made choosing a major impossible, about the scholarship that had made Westlake possible for me. What I didn't tell him, not yet, was how I'd spent high school carefully constructing a version of myself that wouldn't attract attention or questions, how coming to college felt like the first chance to breathe freely. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, though the rain continued steadily. Students began to venture out, hurrying between buildings under shared jackets and improvised newspaper shelters. Orientation leaders appeared in the library, clipboard in hand, trying to salvage what remained of the day's schedule. "They're resilient, I'll give them that," Jake observed as an enthusiastic orientation leader began gathering freshmen for a modified campus tour. "Want to join them?" I promised the standard tour doesn't usually include waiting. I hesitated, looking at the group forming near the entrance. The thought of rejoining the official orientation activities felt oddly disappointing after the unexpected connection of the past hour. Jake seemed to read my expression. "Or," he said, "I could give you the unofficial tour. The one that shows you where to find the best coffee at 2 a.m. during finals week, which dining hall actually has edible food, and all the quiet spots where you can be alone when campus gets too overwhelming." The offer hung between us, weighted with possibilities I wasn't ready to fully examine. "I'd like that," I said simply. His smile was worth the flutter of anxiety that accompanied my decision. "Great. Let me text my roommate to bring us some dry clothes. We can change, and then I'll show you the real Westlake." As Jake pulled out his phone, I looked around at the grand library hall, at the students gradually dispersing to continue their official orientation activities, at the rain still falling outside the tall windows. Nothing about this day had gone as planned, yet somehow it felt exactly right. Jake's roommate arrived 20 minutes later with a backpack of dry clothes and an umbrella large enough to shelter a small family. He was a lanky guy named Miguel who gave Jake a knowing look that was both teasing and approving. "So this is why you weren't answering the emergency group text," Miguel said. "We were placing bets on whether you'd been washed away in the great orientation flood." "What emergency group text?" Jake asked, digging through the backpack. "The one about whether we should order pizza or Chinese for dinner," Miguel replied with a straight face. "Life or death stuff, man." Jake rolled his eyes and handed me a bundle of clothes. "The bathroom's down that hall. These might be a bit big, but they're dry." The sweatpants and hoodie he'd given me were indeed too large, but the soft fabric felt wonderful after hours in damp clothes. The hoodie bore the logo of the university's literary magazine, the Westlake Review, where Jake mentioned he worked as an assistant editor. I rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My hair was a disaster, curling wildly as it dried, but I couldn't bring myself to care. When I returned to the entrance hall, Jake had also changed and was deep in conversation with Miguel. They both looked up as I approached, and something in Jake's expression made my stomach flip. "Better?" he asked. "Much," I replied, tugging at the oversized hoodie. "Though I might need a belt if I plan to walk anywhere." Miguel laughed. "Jake's clothes have that effect on most people. He shops in that could potentially shelter a family of 4 section." He checked his watch and added, "I should get back. Some of us have actual responsibilities, like deciding between pepperoni or supreme." After Miguel left, Jake turned to me with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Ready for that tour?" The rains let up a bit. Under the massive umbrella, we ventured back outside. The campus had taken on a washed-out, glistening quality in the aftermath of the storm. Puddles reflected the clearing sky, and the air felt fresh and clean. Jake kept the umbrella centered carefully between us, though our shoulders still brushed occasionally as we walked. True to his word, Jake's tour was nothing like the official version. He showed me the hidden courtyard behind the humanities building where students napped in hammocks during spring, the cafe in the basement of the science center that made coffee strong enough to raise the dead during finals, and the top floor of the student union that had the best view of sunset over the campus. As we walked, Jake greeted various students by name, introducing me with a casual, "This is Alex, he's new," that somehow made me feel included rather than labeled. I noticed the easy way he moved through the spaces of campus, confident but never arrogant, and how people responded to him with genuine warmth. "So," he said as we paused on a covered bridge that connected 2 parts of campus, watching the swollen creek rush beneath us, "what are you most nervous about?" "Starting college, I mean." The question caught me off guard with its directness. I considered giving the standard answer, classes, making friends, finding my way around, but something about the moment, about him, made me want to be honest. "Being myself," I said finally, keeping my eyes on the churning water below. I spent a lot of high school trying to be invisible in certain ways. I thought college would be different, that I'd magically transform into this confident person who doesn't care what anyone thinks. But now that I'm here, I shrugged, not sure how to finish. Jake was quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd said too much, been too serious. But when I glanced at him, his expression was thoughtful rather than put off. "I get that," he said. "Freshman year, I was still trying to be the person my parents expected. Pre-law, debate team, the whole package." He leaned against the railing. I was miserable and not even doing a good job of hiding it. Then one day my English professor pulled me aside after I'd turned in this really angry essay about a Dickens novel, and she asked me what I really wanted to write about. He smiled at the memory. No one had ever asked me that before. What I wanted, not what I should do or what would look good on a resume. It took me 3 more months to change my major and tell my parents. But that was the moment I started actually being at Westlake instead of just attending, if that makes sense. It did make sense, perfectly. "How did your parents take it?" I asked. "Not great at first," he admitted. "My dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. But they came around eventually. They're still hoping I'll come to my senses and apply to law school, but they've stopped actively pushing." The conversation paused as a group of students passed by, laughing about something. When they'd gone, Jake turned to face me directly. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" he said. My heart rate picked up. "Sure." "Back in the tent, when everything was flooding and people were panicking, you looked terrified, but not just about the storm. What was going through your mind?" The question was unexpected but somehow not invasive. I considered how to answer, how much to reveal to someone I'd just met but already felt I could trust. "I don't do well in crowds," I began. "Never have. But it's more than that. In situations like that, where everyone's reacting and moving as a group, I always feel outside somehow. Like there's a script everyone else has that I'm missing." I paused, searching for the right words. "In high school, I got really good at watching people, figuring out how to blend in. But it always feels like I'm performing rather than just being." Jake nodded slowly. "And what are you afraid will happen if you stop performing?" The question hit so close to the heart of my fears that I almost took a step back. "That people will see the real me, and..." I couldn't finish. "And they won't like what they see." Jake suggested gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the rain-washed campus. You know, he finally said, the thing about college that no one tells you in those glossy brochures is that it's full of people who are terrified of being seen for who they really are. Everyone's performing to some degree. The trick is finding the people who make you feel like you don't have to. He turned back to me with a smile that felt like an offering. For what it's worth, I like the glimpses of the real Alex I've seen today. The one who makes dry jokes in the middle of a crisis and asks thoughtful questions and wears borrowed clothes with surprising dignity. Something warm unfurled in my chest at his words. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was my roommate, wondering where I was and if I was coming to the freshman dinner in the main dining hall. Duty calls? Jake asked, noticing my expression. Yeah, apparently there's a mandatory freshman dinner happening soon. I hesitated, not wanting our time together to end, but aware of the orientation schedule I was supposed to be following. You should go, Jake said. The food's actually decent on special occasions, and it's a good chance to meet people in your dorm. Right? I agreed, trying not to sound disappointed. I should probably change back into my own clothes first. Keep the hoodie, Jake said quickly, as a souvenir of your first Westlake adventure. You can return it sometime. The implication that we would see each other again made me smile. Thanks. For everything today, the rescue, the tour, the conversation. My pleasure, he replied, and I could tell he meant it. Tell you what, there's a coffee shop just off campus called Marginalia. Best study spot in town. I work there Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. Stop by sometime if you want to continue the unofficial orientation. The invitation felt casual, yet significant, a door being held open rather than a demand to walk through it. I will, I promised. We exchanged phone numbers before parting ways at the dining hall, where streams of freshmen were already filing in for dinner. Jake gave me a small wave before turning to join a group of upperclassmen across the quad, his tall figure easy to follow until he disappeared into one of the buildings. That night, as I sat among my new classmates listening to the dean's welcome speech, I found myself running my fingers over the cuff of Jake's hoodie, which I'd kept on despite having changed back into my own jeans. The events of the day played through my mind like scenes from a movie. The chaos of the flooding tent, the unexpected shelter of Jake's jacket, the easy conversation that had followed. For the first time since arriving on campus, I felt a sense of possibility that went beyond academic achievement or social acceptance. There was something about the way Jake had looked at me, really looked at me, that made me wonder if college might indeed be the place where I could finally stop performing and start living. The orientation leader at our table asked everyone to share one thing they'd learned about Westlake so far. When my turn came, I smiled and said, sometimes the most important connections happen when things don't go according to plan. Later, as I unpacked my suitcase in my dorm room, I carefully hung Jake's hoodie in my closet. My roommate, a friendly guy named Trent who was already decorating his side of the room with soccer pennants, noticed the logo. You work for the literary magazine already? That's impressive for a freshman, he commented. No, I replied, smoothing the soft fabric. It belongs to a friend. He loaned it to me during the storm today. Friend, huh? Trent's tone was knowing, but not judgmental. Must be a good one to give up prime college merch. I thought about Jake's smile, about the way he'd created a space for me in the middle of chaos, about his invitation to the coffee shop. Yeah, I said, I think he might be. That night, as I lay in my new bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of dorm life around me, my phone lit up with a text message. Jake, hope the freshman dinner wasn't too painful. Did they make you sing the alma mater yet? They saved that special torture for tomorrow. I smiled in the darkness, typing back, no singing yet. I'm practicing my tone-deaf version for maximum embarrassment. His reply came quickly, that's the spirit. By the way, the hoodie looks better on you than it ever did on me. Just saying. I stared at the message, warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Outside my window, the campus was quiet, the earlier storm leaving behind a clear night sky filled with stars. In that moment, despite all the uncertainties that lay ahead, one thing felt clear. The thunderstorm that had flooded the orientation tent had washed away more than just the carefully planned schedule. It had cleared a path to something unexpected and promising. I typed back, I'll wear it when I come to Marginalia. Sunday? Jake, it's a date. Or not. Whatever you want it to be. No pressure. I smiled at his careful phrasing, the way he was leaving space for me to define what was happening between us. Me. I'd like it to be a date. There was a longer pause before his response came through. Then it's definitely a date. See you Sunday, Alex. I fell asleep that night still wearing the oversized hoodie, surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of my new home, feeling for the first time like the version of myself I'd been hiding might finally have a chance to emerge, not in a sudden dramatic revelation, but gradually, in the safe space created by unexpected connections and thunderstorm rescues. College, it seemed, was going to be nothing like I'd planned, and everything I hadn't known I needed. Total _char_count. 18,653.